Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy was in Lisbon and Brussels today on his tour of European states aimed at boosting support for the war effort against Russia. The good news for Ukraine is that he was able to make the trip at all. This is a visit forced to take place later than planned because of Russian offensives in Ukraine, which have left defenders ceding territory, among other reasons, because it has been running short of weapons. That's what this visit is meant to change, at least to some degree. Zelenskyy visited a Belgian military airbase today. The government in Brussels has agreed to provide 30 U.S.-made F16 fighter jets over the next 4 years. The Belgian government has also pledged 1 billion euros in military aid, and that matches a pledge by the Spanish government made on Monday. Here's Zelenskyy speaking in Brussels today.
Right now, when Russia is trying to expand and prolong the war, we need more concrete steps to bring peace closer. First of all, we have a clear commitment to the supply of combat aircraft to Ukraine. Thank you for this decision. The agreement we have with Belgium is for the supply of 30 F16 aircraft. Our task is to make sure that we can start using the first F16s in Ukraine this year and make our position stronger.
Terry Schultz joins us now from Brussels. Terry, Ukraine has been asking for F-16s for a really long time now. How beneficial is this contribution now, more than 2 years into the war and spaced out over 4 years?
That's right, Nicole. This was one of those advanced weapons, in fact, that President Zelenskyy was told he would never get. So in that sense, it's still a success, even more than 2 years into the war. But in that time, of course, Russia has made a lot of advances. A lot of Ukrainians have been killed. And military analysts have always said the F-16 doesn't solve everything. Yes, it gives Ukraine a more powerful air force. It can help them contest the airspace over Ukraine. But here's another hang-up that comes with this contribution by the Belgians. They say that it can only be used in Ukrainian territory. So there won't be any use of these F-16s going into Russia to try to destroy assets on that side of the border.
President Zelenskyy, over these past couple of days, has signed security agreements with Belgium, with Spain, and most recently with Portugal, individually, that is. Wouldn't it be far more beneficial and efficient, maybe, to just negotiate with the entire EU, with the entire bloc?
Well, that would make sense, of course, if all 27 countries would agree to support Ukraine to the extent that these bilateral agreements have done. For example, the Belgian one is 10 years, and it gives Ukraine increasing military support, financial support, training exercises, things like this. But in the EU, that would mean that all 27 have to come to the same decision. And once again, as we've seen so many times in the past when it comes to Ukraine, Hungary has refused to support, allowing the European Union to even use some money that's already been earmarked for Ukraine. It says it will not allow more weapons to be shipped to Ukraine, and that anybody who wants to help Ukraine simply wants war over peace. So Hungary is really a sticking point in the EU acting as a whole. Now, I should point out that should Ukraine become a member, which is, of course, what it wants to do and what the EU has promised it, there will be some security guarantees that go along with that. But certainly there's no way that they can get a blanket guarantee from the EU as things stand now.
There was in Brussels today a meeting of EU defense ministers. Was there any signal that Hungary might be willing to lift its blockade on Ukrainian assistance?
On the contrary, actually, I asked ministers coming out of the meeting if there'd been any sign of this, and they basically had to say no. There are some side initiatives, like a proposal Poland has made for a new border initiative that Hungary may be willing to support kind of piecemeal. But on these big budget matters, they didn't show any sign of relenting yet. And that's really disappointing for Ukraine and disappointing for all the EU countries who really want to increase their support for that country.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned it there. There are countries that want to increase their support, and they are finding ways to help Ukraine without the need for unanimous decisions. One of those countries, or one of those, is a Czech-led initiative aimed at sourcing artillery shells from all over the world. We'll be right back with you, Terry, but first, here's Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala in Prague today.
Czechia continues to develop the ammunition initiative in coordination with international partners. 15 EU and NATO countries already contributed over 1.6 billion euros. Our efforts will soon improve Ukraine's defense. As I promised, the first tens of thousands 155mm ammunition will be delivered in June. Ukraine can expect the first shipment within the next days.
That should be music to Zelensky's ears. Terry, what can you tell us about this initiative?
That's right, Nicole. As we've been speaking about so many times, ammunition is really one of the items that, you know, is meaning life or death for Ukrainian soldiers. Some of the retreats that we've had to see Ukrainian troops make have been because they have been running out of ammunition. So this Czech initiative, which only became public in February, even though it had been underway since before the war began, has really been a bright spot. And it's really shown how a relatively small country like Czechia can make a big difference when it wants to. Let me show you how that was done. Shell hunger. That's what it's called when troops lack ammunition. But Ukrainian soldiers are already suffering shell starvation, a factor in recent retreats they've been forced to make.
The Ukrainians are not running out of courage. They are running out of ammunition.
A pledge made last year by the European Union to provide Ukraine 1 million rounds of ammunition by this March only managed to send half that amount by the self-imposed deadline. Meanwhile, however, another plan was gathering steam far from Brussels and the headlines. Underway even before Moscow's full-scale invasion in February 2022, the so-called Czech initiative had been quietly arranging weapons deliveries to Ukraine that had been purchased on the global market.
We were gathering different types of weapons on a large Excel sheet, and we were preparing for the possibility that somebody would actually buy it from the list and we would be able to deliver it to Ukraine ASAP.
The program's coordinator, Tomasz Kupeczny, says their focus turned to ammunition when European production didn't scale up as quickly as hoped.
We just came in, we said, okay, so this wasn't able to be done by the EU institutions under the plan, so let's try this.
The robust Czech weapons industry identified ammunition stockpiles all over the world, some in countries that would not sell directly to Ukraine for political reasons. David Hotz is CEO of STV, one of the Czech manufacturers helping facilitate the purchases through Prague.
We as a company, as well as other companies within the Czech Republic, we have large network of suppliers and producers around the world. So we just activate our contacts and make things happen.
Denmark and the Netherlands were the first other countries to invest in the Czech plan while it was under the radar. The Czech government went public with it earlier this year.
We can already buy approximately 500,000 rounds of large caliber ammunition.
Czech citizens have raised 70 million euros for the program through crowdfunding. And even next door in Slovakia, where the government cut off support for Ukraine, a similar effort collected 4 million euros. Now at least 20 governments have signed on to the initiative, with Germany spending the most. Tomasz Kupeczny says while his country is proud of this help for Ukraine, the real goal would be to see it get too big to be handled in Prague.
We will gladly hand over the system of how we do things. I mean, we will be happy of this not being labeled the Czech initiative anymore.
The first deliveries should reach Ukraine next month, and Czech officials believe well over 1 million rounds can be sourced this way over the next year, if Kyiv's allies are serious about preventing a shell famine on the front line.
And our correspondent, Terry Schultz, who could be seen in that report doing some heavy lifting, is still with us. Terry, this is a remarkable initiative. And as we heard from the Czech Prime Minister earlier, the first shells are set to arrive within days. So has this initiative been able to move more quickly because it wasn't dragged down by EU bureaucracy?
That's certainly one of the reasons. And the Czechs, you know, they didn't ask anybody what they thought. They didn't wait around to get a lot of other countries in support when they started this initiative. They just started calling around the Czech weapons manufacturers to people they knew, to companies they knew, and they said, hey, have you got any shells lying around that we could perhaps buy? And, you know, it was just a very practical effort. So the Prime Minister Fiala is very justifiably proud of it. They were able to do this basically starting on their own, and then other countries joined in quite quickly and wanted to buy these items because they saw that Ukraine needed them so badly, and they did not have to wait around for consensus. So, yeah, it was a lot easier for the Czechs to move.
And it is a really strong coalition they've put together. How important do you think are these multilateral efforts now and maybe in the future, given the Hungarian blocking of EU action?
Absolutely. The absolute, standstill on some of the EU aid makes clear how important this creative approach to sourcing ammunition and other items for Ukraine is. And in fact, they may be talking about the EU partners that are involved in this initiative, but there are lots of countries who don't want to be named, who are both buying supplies for Ukraine and selling them for Ukraine. They don't want to be seen shipping anything directly to Ukraine, and that's why the Czechs are serving sort of as a middleman, and they've been able to get around a lot of both the sort of political problems other countries might have in supporting the program, but also getting around the protectionism that you see in the EU weapons industry and trying to only sell things that they produce themselves.
Yeah. The EU, talking about producing it themselves, they pledged to boost their ability to manufacture shells. How is that going?
Well, they absolutely have boosted their ability, and some companies have increased their output by 4 times. There is still a big problem, Nicole, in getting the orders in. Now the manufacturers have really scaled up and say we could produce a lot more, but governments still aren't buying them. So there was this initiative to get Ukraine 1 million rounds of 155mm ammunition by March, and they didn't make that deadline. The EU says they will ship that many rounds by the end of the year, and they're saying with this Czech initiative coming from the EU, that's going to be an even greater number. But they weren't able to move as quickly as they had hoped to, that's for sure.
That was DW's Terry Schultz in Brussels. Thank you so much for your reporting, Terry.